Welcome to Newsday, your number one resource for the entire week's worth of VR news. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope you all had an amazing holiday, but holy cow, 2024 has started off with an absolute bang for VR. So much has happened over this past week, and 2024 is already looking to be a pretty massive year for the space. And of course, it all starts here. With a brand new, more powerful chip from Qualcomm, Sony announcing a new standalone VR headset, while Shiftall announces their own small form factor headset and trackers, the Apple Vision Pro is just around the corner with an official release date, and of course, overnight, more than 10,000 games just got VR support through the Universal Unreal Engine Injector, which is actually turning out to be surprisingly controversial. This is about to be an incredibly jam-packed week of VR, spatial computing, and we got a lot to cover, so let's just get right into the news. And I figured we'd start this one out with something incredibly surprising. Sony has just announced its newest device, which is a standalone VR headset with a really interesting set of controllers to go along with it. And I've never seen anything like this before, but I think Sony just might be onto something. So obviously, Sony has been in the VR industry for a long time now. The original PlayStation VR released 8 years ago, and just last year, Sony refreshed the PSVR for the PlayStation 5, but this new headset from Sony is quite a bit different from all of those. In fact, it's not a PlayStation branded device at all. Instead, Sony says it's, quote, aimed at creatives building 3D content, which might immediately lose a lot of people's interest, but there are a few things here that I think are really worth talking about. And this device is one of many that plays into a whole new wave of devices that we're about to see from a lot of different manufacturers. But let's talk about this headset first. We don't know everything about it, but we do know it's rocking 4K micro OLED displays, a flip-up display design, which I'm really glad to see making a comeback, and powering it all is Qualcomm's newest processor, the XR2 Plus Gen 2. And we'll talk about that in just a second because that's kind of a big deal too. But I think the most interesting thing about this new device are actually these controllers, and they do something pretty cool. Let me just give a quick explanation first. So this headset isn't exactly meant to be used to play Half-Life Alyx or Beat Saber. It's really built to interact with and create 3D models in real space using mixed reality with CAD software. And the controllers reflect that intended purpose, utilizing an asymmetrical design with one hand serving as a sort of pointer or anchor, while the other hand is using some form of hand tracking but with a twist. The headset comes with a ring both for feedback and for subtle controls using the thumb against your finger. And immediately I wish I had that ring today for modern devices. I've been using hand tracking more and more in my own projects, and the ring design just makes a lot of sense, both for haptic feedback, something that you lack entirely with hand tracking, but also for those small inputs that hand tracking just isn't great at. And obviously this device isn't necessarily built for other purposes, but it is more than likely going to be on Android just like Quest 2 and 3, for example. So if it is built using OpenXR, then Sony's device could very well be used for a lot more than just 3D design. Although likely it's going to be coming for a pretty hefty price. Sony hasn't announced that part yet, but just know, as cool as this thing is looking so far, it's definitely not so much a consumer headset. But we also got to talk about the chip that's powering it, because it was also just announced. And right behind the silicon that's in Apple's upcoming headset, this is currently the most powerful spatial computing chipset on the market, serving as an upgrade over the Quest 3's current chip, and it's about to be in a lot of hardware, not just Sony's new headset. So this is the Qualcomm XR2 Plus Gen 2, an upgraded version of the XR2 Gen 2 that you see in the Quest 3. And it brings along with it a bunch of snazzy new features, including an upgraded clock speed for both the GPU and CPU side, offering a 15% and 20% increase respectively, while also increasing the supported resolution to 4K per eye with a total of 12 concurrent camera streams versus the plain Gen 2's 3K per eye and 10 cameras. Now, this isn't a massive upgrade per se, it's not a generational leap, but it's a big enough boost that it allows manufacturers to go toe-to-toe with Apple's headset, at least in terms of resolution on paper, which is exactly what's happening, and Sony's not the only one. Google and Samsung also have their own headset on the way using this chipset. And while we don't know much about that yet, I do want to just take a quick moment to look at how exciting things are right now in this space. In 2024, whether it's AR, VR, MR, spatial computing, whatever you want to call it, Google, Samsung, Sony, and Apple are all releasing headsets in the same year. Things are getting real really fast. And we'll touch back on that in just a moment, because something pretty exciting just happened. And in just a bit longer than a week, I'm about about to sell off the last kidney that I have, and my wallet's about to get a whole lot lighter, as Apple has just announced that the Vision Pro is coming way sooner than I even thought. Pre-orders are officially opening up for Apple's headset on the 19th of this month, with the headset becoming available at the very beginning of February. So as of recording this video, we're only 3 weeks away from the Vision Pro launch, from it being in hands, which feels kind of crazy. For about the past 5 years, I've been covering leaks and supply chain information on a mythical Apple headset that was supposed to be coming every single year, but here we are. This year is that year. And of course, as you may know, in typical Apple fashion, it's not a cheap device, starting at $3,500 for the base 256 gigabyte version. Ouch. I would have hoped they'd add a little bit more memory for that price, but at least they announced that it will be shipping with an extra head strap in the box that includes an over the top of the head part of the strap. And I'm guessing this change was to alleviate some of the early complaints that a headset made out of metal and glass gets a bit heavy and uncomfortable over time. But really, I gotta say that my biggest worry for the Vision Pro out of the gate is just a lack of content. It's something that VR headsets even today suffer from, and that's after being on the market for years now. However, we did get a bit of news that alleviates at least a few of my concerns. On release, basically, the majority of iPhone and iPad apps will be accessible in the headset. It's also capable of being used as a display extension for a Mac. Apple also says that more than 150 3D movies will be available, along with over 250 games on launch. Caveat though is that most of those games are just going to be flat games in a 3D space, but there are a few VR native titles that are making their way over, like Rec Room for example. And it doesn't look like there's a whole lot to choose from, but I haven't actually seen what the store has to offer yet, so I guess we'll just have to wait a few weeks so I can share with you guys. I did find something else kind of funny though, and I guess this is the meme break for this episode, but it feels just so incredibly Apple. So a developer email from Apple has been making the rounds recently, and it talks about how to launch your Vision Pro apps, just giving some tips on publishing and how to describe the app itself. And just below the line where Apple makes sure that you don't capitalize the V in Vision OS, they say very specifically that you should never refer to your app on the Vision Pro as an augmented reality app or VR application, and under no circumstance will you ever use the terms mixed reality or XR, which, I mean, actually kind of makes sense. Not even XR experts know what XR actually stands for, and anyone that says that they do isn't actually an expert. And instead of all these terms that we've been using for a while, Apple wants all apps on their devices to be referred to as spatial computing apps, which might sound a little pretentious, probably because it kinda is. But the funny part is that it's actually working. I know some people's biggest fear was that Apple would come into the industry and rewrite everything with new terms like they invented it, which they didn't even invent the term spatial computing, but really, we're watching it happen in real time. The industry is transitioning and everyone's using spatial computing now. Spatial is the new VR. But now we gotta talk about something on the total flip side of spatial computing, and this is probably the best news that general VR users have gotten in a long time, and this time it does not involve getting a second job for an expensive piece of hardware. And after waiting almost 2 years, it's finally here. This is PreyDog's Universal Unreal Engine Injector, a long-awaited tool that essentially injects VR functionality into just about any Unreal Engine 4 or 5 game. From Hi-Fi Rush to Satisfactory to Spyro to Fortnite, if it's built on those engines, chances are it'll work to some degree. And overnight, more than 10,000 games just got some level of VR support, ranging from basic stereo rendering to full-on motion controller near native VR game support. And the crazy part is that using it is completely free.
It's free real estate.
But let me give some background on what exactly this is and what it isn't. So we've been able to play flat games in VR for a long time now, either through intense modding or by using a headset as a sort of monitor replacement, but the UE Injector does quite a bit more than just providing a theater for playing games. It inherently changes the way these games work. For third-person games, for example, the headset acts as the in-game camera, and with full stereo rendering like you'd expect, your head is in the game. And it actually functions a lot like other native third-person VR games. And for some first-person games, you even have full controller support, like in Robot Quest. Your controllers are your VR hands just like in any typical VR game. And getting it all to work isn't overcomplicated complicated like some modding tools have been in the past. You just download the program and launch it with the game that you want to play, add a profile if you want for specific features, press inject, and you're in. You can go from playing on a monitor to playing in VR within minutes, which has never been on the table before. And all of this might sound amazing, but the Injector actually has a surprising amount of haters. It's become quite the controversial topic, and after spending the past few days messing around with it, it's actually for kinda good reason. And I gotta say, the Unreal Engine Injector is just really interesting. I think at the very least, it opens up a legit, completely new way to play games, at least for the compatible ones. And while I definitely can't say that this is the definitive best way to play every game for a few reasons I'll bring up in a moment, I gotta admit, it really is just a completely different experience playing something like Hi-Fi Rush. That's not even the best example, it's just a game that I've played a lot of. And I've mostly played it on Steam Deck or TV, I have quite a few hours in it, but playing it in the Injector just feels like an entirely different game, and that's mostly in a good way. It's a much more active and immersive experience by a long shot, and in some situations, this would probably be my preferred way to play a lot of these games. But there's a pretty big downside. As cool as it is that you're now able to inject VR compatibility into tens of thousands of games, these games just were never intended by the developers to be used in VR. Now, in some games, that's fine, and there are a lot of settings and workarounds. At the best worst case scenario, you might just experience some shader incompatibility or a jarring camera movement, but it's not terrible. That is, if you've been in VR for a long time or just don't get motion sick. Plus, like I said, these games weren't intended to be in VR, so some things can just break. And this is exactly why a lot of people, especially VR developers, have had a pretty negative sentiment towards the Injector for a long time. The main worry is that people will get super excited that their favorite game now has some sort of VR functionality, and within minutes of hopping into an uncurated, non-officially supported game that whips their vision around haphazardly, they then get sick and hate VR forever. Which is exactly what VR developers have been fighting against for years now. And yeah, when you're talking about injecting VR support into games that were never intended to have it, well, not only is the quality of the VR experience going to be a complete unknown, but the possibility of motion sickness just goes through the roof. I even experienced some discomfort, and I don't normally have any motion sickness. So just some due diligence. Thousands of games just got unlocked for VR usage. Some of it's amazing, some of it's great, and some of it's awful. I'll leave a list of compatible games that have been tested in the description, but just don't expect too much. And if you get motion sick easily or you're new to VR, be very cautious. However, if you're cool with it though, then, well, PCVR just got an entire new truckload of games, and it didn't cost you anything, and it's a completely new way to use your headset, and in my opinion, that's really freaking cool. It just adds value to the entire VR ecosystem as long as you know what you're getting yourself into. So I know we've been talking about a lot of new standalone headsets, but PCVR is also getting some love as well. 3 new pieces of hardware were all announced by Shiftall, and I'll just start with the 2 smaller things here. One is a revamped, improved version of their highly memeable MewTalk, a microphone system that muffles your voice as you're raging in VR chat. The other is an improvement upon the Harator X Wireless, their current flagship IMU-based full-body tracking setup, and this is pretty interesting. The new Harator X Wireless R uses the same full-body tracking system that their previous system used, which is IMUs, similar to Slime or Mokopi, but there's an inherent problem with all IMU tracking. Over time, it will drift, which will require frequent recalibrations, and that's where the new R version comes in. It combines a camera connected to a PC to automatically correct drift over time using computer vision, which is pretty slick. The thing that I'm most excited about though, or at least interested in, is the Megane X Superlight, a super tiny, lightweight PCVR headset using 2 2560 by 2560 micro OLED displays and base station tracking. So it's essentially a direct big screen beyond competitor. Now, you may remember the previous Megane X. I've tried it at the past 2 CESs, but it never really shipped outside of Japan, which supposedly will not be the case with the new Superlight. And of course, we don't know the price or any other specs yet, but really I'm just happy to see more micro OLED displays and more small form factor VR. All 3 believe these things should be shipping this year, at least according to Shiftall. And whoa, oh man, that was a crazy episode of Tuesday Newsday. It's beyond incredibly exciting that in one video I can talk about Sony, Apple, Samsung, and Google all releasing headsets in the same year. After years of obsessively covering leaks on all these topics, I don't know, it's just crazy to see it coming. And you know what? A few years ago, I said that 2020 was the year of VR, and it actually came pretty true. It was the year that standalone VR just exploded. And well, I think I'm just gonna say it, 2024 is the year of spatial computing. And between all the big tech companies, spatial computing has become their new favorite word, which is really good for all of us that have been here for years. Because if you really know what's going on, you realize whether it's called XR, AR, VR, MR, SR, or spatial computing, it's all the same thing. And I can tell you now, it's about to be a crazy year. But that was this week's news. We got a lot more coming next week with all the CES coverage, so just make sure you leave a question of the week down below and I may just answer yours next week. And all the relevant links in this video, including my Discord server, will be in the description. But I wanted to say thank you so much to my Patreon supporters for making this video possible. And of course, don't forget to like this video if you loved it, subscribe if you want more of this, and hit that freaking bell if you just can't live without it. Happy New Year again, and I hope you all have an amazing day. Much love, Thrill out.